Hello everyone, thank you very much for tuning in. This is the first in a video part series where we're going to meet some of the people out there in the ESG realm who are working specifically in technology and working with technology to help meet ESG goals out in industry. So I'm joined here today by Page Motes. Page Motes is a former VP of Sustainability in Dell. And I'll let her introduce herself briefly in a moment. My name is Michael Linehan. I represent Responsible Computing. We are a consortium made up of large industry, medium to small industry, academic institutes, and government agencies, which provides a holistic framework for setting corporate policies. Our aim is to restore trust in technology by using technology to augment ESG efforts within organizations. So, Paige, thanks very much for joining us today, and thanks very much for working so diligently on responsible computing efforts up until, up until the present moment. So how about you tell us a little bit about yourself, about how maybe you got started in working in the whole space of ESG.
Happy to. Well, thanks again for inviting me into this conversation. I think it's important to get different perspectives from practitioners and leaders across the board. So I like many people in the ESG space, have come to this work in a very interesting and not straight line route. I spent a very long time in the kind of sales and business development profession, a lot of it in technology, but about 20 years ago, I really had a pivot point in which I came to work for an organization that right about the time companies were trying to wrap their arms around what to do post-Enron, post-WorldCom, where cultures and compliance were really exploding within companies due to corporate malfeasance. And I had an opportunity to work in an organization that partnered with companies to help them do the right thing and build cultures of integrity and risk and compliance and governance programs. So that really started me on the path of the G. A lot of the governance pieces, the risk management pieces, the ethics and compliance pieces, which I believe you have to have a solid structure or the E and the S pieces don't really sing. They don't really come to life. But I was able to spend a number of years in that firm advising companies. And then a buddy of mine that came to Dell Technologies said, "You think it's so easy, try to do it in-house." And so I took him up on the challenge and came to Dell, and I spent 14 years at Dell, the first 10 being in the ethics compliance space, and really enjoyed that work. But had an opportunity to kind of pivot more into the environmental and human rights space. And so I did for the past 4 years, and it has been an incredible challenge, as you know, in this dynamic space. But to get to know the E, the environmental piece, a lot more in depth and work more in the human rights S piece was incredibly exciting and valuable.
Amazing. So when you say the human rights part of it, because I'm super interested there to learn more about what specifically you were doing. Is this looking like, let's say, across Dell's supply chain, for example, and looking at like where everything you're getting is sourced from? Is it all done ethically? Is that kind of the idea there?
Yeah, and not just at Dell, any company, a lot of the human rights work is sometimes the highest areas of focus are in supply chain, because you have, in many cases, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of suppliers spread out all over the world. And being able to ensure that you're addressing risk or addressing opportunity in those spaces is really difficult. So a lot of the effort is put there because, a big part of human rights, as just one example, is ensuring there's no child labor, forced labor, as just two examples, right? And supply chains can be the places where those types of risks could occur. We were very lucky that Dell and many others within the technology space, and now beyond technology, partnered with an organization called the Responsible Business Alliance, where we got to do that as a collective. One company can't tackle those issues alone, so doing it as a collective, kind of like how we're, the work that you do with the consortium, you're better together. But human rights goes beyond supply chain. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of the privacy work and security work that happens inside companies are connected to the right to privacy in the human rights doctrine. Working and living in a corrupt-free environment, a lot of the anti-corruption work that happens in companies is connected to that. And it can even extend to when you make products or use even technology products, accessibility, fair and equal access to things that help make individuals and communities better and more fair and equitable has its roots in a lot of the human rights work. So we focus a lot on supply chain, but it really is pervasive across all aspects of a company.
Gotcha. Did you find that the technology industry is kind of one that moves at like breakneck speeds, where, let's say, something to do with what you were speaking to there about human rights, about rights to privacy, for example, or even if it is something to do with accessibility, security, these kind of things, I would imagine that when there's such amazing innovations taking place, that sometimes a lot of these things can be pushed to the background in order to, let's make something and then let's kind of pick up the pieces afterward. I would imagine a lot of your job was actually spent cleaning up a little bit of a trail in the background.
You know, I would say, at least at the company that I last came from, they've been doing this kind of work for decades. So we weren't really in cleanup mode there. A lot of that work was built in. You know, back when Six Sigma first became popular, you know, it revolutionized the concept of, we don't just grab the broken items at the end of the line. We build in to the design and to the process the right things. So when things come off the line, it's much more, you know, consistent. The same can be said about these kinds of concepts. And so a lot of companies, and I'm lucky my last company was the same, have really spent a long time building in capacity so that, you know, building in compliance, building in sustainable design, et cetera, was built in by design through the process. Now, I would agree with you 100%. Technology is evolving so quickly. New emerging technologies are coming on the forefront of all of our work so quickly. Companies are scanning the horizon for what are the implications of these new emerging technologies, and not just implications from the standpoint of cost or efficiency, but also what does it mean for the environment? What does it mean from a human rights or human capital standpoint, diversity, equity, reducing bias, non-discrimination? All of these concepts have to be kind of planned for and built in so that, to your point, you aren't waiting to the end and cleaning up messes. And it's becoming a real effort that companies have to think about it in a cross-functional way. It's not just the technology organizations kind of operating in a silo. They're having to really engage and reach out broadly.
So 2 questions that come off the back of that, right? And these are going to hopefully not be like, seem like tough questions, right? But they came into my head, so I said I'd ask them. Is it going to be more difficult? The first one, I guess, is, given what you've just said there, is it going to be more difficult for a company who is a small organization who really like lives and dies by its balance sheet? Is it going to be more difficult for them to compete with, let's say, the big technology players, if both organizations are going to have to look at these kind of areas like you outlined here and have those considerations? And I guess the second question then is there a fear that we somewhat limit the creative or productive elements of businesses, you know, solving a lot of our problems in the world by trying to like tick too many boxes?
You know, I can see why people might initially think that and ask the question, but what I've seen is a little bit the opposite. I'll give you an example. I think smaller organizations that have more of an agile setting have the ability to make these pivots more easily and more quickly than a very large company that has very specific processes that they may have to change or convince the broader leadership to change, right? I mean, when you've been doing something the same way for a very long time and you're a very large company, there are entrenched expectations, processes, mindsets that in some companies might be more difficult to change, right? Whereas the smaller organization has that agile mindset and has, that kind of hungry, innovative approach where they have the ability to make change more quickly. So I think they could have an advantage. The other thing I believe is that some of these big existential problems, whether it be climate action or water health or water access, it could be, human rights. Smaller, innovative organizations, I think, are going to be on the forefront of helping us solve these problems, right? I mean, think about some of the really exciting things that have happened out there in the past 10 years. A lot of these innovations and exciting items didn't come from the biggest companies, although they're doing a ton of amazing work, but some smaller, more agile, high levels of innovation companies. And there's tons of there's a lot of money out there that is being invested in smaller organizations to really try to solve these problems. So I think there's opportunity for small organizations to find places where they can add innovation value to solve one of these problems, more than just the mindset of innovate and try to think about how to address these issues. Maybe the innovation is about value adding on these issues.
And that's how they actually gain a competitive advantage through
100%.
Yeah, through adhering to, well, not even adhering, through enabling ESG through their innovation.
100%. There are many companies out there that are turning to other organizations going, we can't do it alone. Can you help us? Or, maybe these smaller organizations are going to be the innovators of the future to help us solve these big problems.
So do you think that then it becomes actually less like a competition between the big organizations and the smaller organizations? But do you think that there's almost like a gig economy that emerges for the smaller companies in helping the bigger ones kind of get their act together?
That could absolutely be an interesting niche for some of these organizations. It also could be partnerships, co-innovation between the two. There are many examples out there where bigger companies are investing in smaller organizations that are part of their ecosystem to innovate. There are smaller there that are coming up with radically exciting ideas in new kinds of materials to make a lot of the products that we rely on today more sustainable. Those products and those materials are bought by the bigger companies to go into their products. And so I think that kind of spirit of co-innovation with your, broader customer base can be an exciting way that a smaller company especially could, find new ways to grow.
Yeah. I mean, one area I think that's coming to mind right now for me, which is very topical, is the AI arms race that's happening between the bigger organizations. I mean, just to even power those machines, it's going to create a whole host of, because everyone's worried about their jobs going, but it's going to create a whole host of business for people who can solve those problems about what to do with.
That's exactly right. I mean, I definitely think the AI space, we need to constantly take care because of the amount of power that AI is going to have. That being said, I do think AI done well with the right kind of oversight and governance and co-innovation mindset could really open up and unlock things that we don't even know exist today for new kinds of markets, new kinds of jobs where, people can pivot from doing repetitive actions to something more creative and interesting, while the repetitive actions may be happening on the AI front, or the modeling that AI could give us for the future could open up our eyes to things we don't even know could be problems that need solving in the future. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. There's also a lot of responsibility for how we deal with AI, but I think those two things can go hand in hand. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to just pivot a little bit here now to you as a, let's say, person who is in charge. Would it be fair to say actually you were in charge of the sustainability strategic, let's say, initiatives of Dell?
Yes. So So Dell, like many big companies, has a real matrixed setup, right? So, we had a corporate center. I led the corporate center for sustainability. And what that really meant was deciding, helping, really identify what are the key priorities for sustainability for the company. What are our strategies around those key priorities globally, enterprise-wide? And then what were our key goals that we needed to identify that we state publicly we care about and we're putting our time and attention and resources and talent? And then strategic initiatives or maybe thought leadership and partnerships. So that's a lot of the work my team did, focused primarily on things like climate action, circular economy, which in the technology space is incredibly important. How are we thinking about the materials use? And closing those loops, and then human rights. Those are kind of the big places, the big bets that we put, and that varies company by company. But make no mistake, but my team and I could never have executed on all of that, right? We had to turn to our friends and colleagues in supply chain and facilities and product development and manufacturing and services and say, help us identify those pieces of this work that affect you and your organization, and then we'll partner to provide expertise, guidance, et cetera, while they're executing. And it was an incredibly magical set of relationships that we were fortunate enough to be involved in, because I think when companies assume that there's just a corporate center that can do everything, well, that's failing out of the gate. It has to be everyone's responsibility.
Absolutely. And the way you even describe your relationships with these departments has actually kind of answered my next question. And that question was going to be, when you come into any kind of cross-functional, job responsibility, right? So for me, for example, I kind of started out my career in operations management. So you're going across different, business functions and trying to tie things together and create common processes that spread across them. I was going to ask you that question of how you manage the relationships where it doesn't look like you're coming in and kind of dictating how other functions do their job to meet the goals of, let's say, your function.
Yeah, you definitely can't do that, at least not in the places that I've worked, right? And that I'm not at Dell anymore, so I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I would just say that what I loved about my time at Dell is that the top leadership of the company over each of the business units, this was not lip service, right? I mean, they really did accept accountability and responsibility and flow down expectations of their portion, and really partnered with us to say, this is how that could get done in our organization. And so there was a lot of, first of all, trust built, but second of all, they held themselves accountable. We didn't have to come in and kind of force anybody to do anything. And that's a blessing. That means that the leadership really understood the importance and value of this work. And it wasn't just fluff, right? They understood customers cared, investors cared, employees cared. So I think when a company at the top levels of the organization really understand their part, and that can involve some education, right? But once you've invested that time, and trust me, we didn't do that alone, and that was a lot of people investing time into that, I think that allows you to have much more trust with each other that the right kinds of activities are happening.
Gotcha. So what advice would you give to, let's say, someone who wants to start off their career and follow kind of the path you have into getting into a strategic position in directing a large organization's efforts in sustainability?
I think probably the answer I might have given you several years ago would have been different than the one I will give you now. Several years ago, I think the mindset, even in my mindset, was you just need to be you need to learn a lot about this space and become a deep expert. I still think you need to know what you're talking about, right? But I think more than anything these days, you have to have a healthy respect to how this particular work adds value to the company and the company's ecosystem. You have to have a business mindset, right? Yeah. And that's different than we need to go reduce emissions because it's the right thing to do. That may be true, but you have to have a crisp understanding of what does that mean to this business? How does it add value for the long term? How does it help either differentiate the company or help the company accelerate their business strategy? So understanding how to connect the dots between the sustainability work or any ESG work with the strategy and purpose of the company is probably the first important thing. So when I talk to people about these types of roles, the first thing I say is, do you even fully understand the strategy of your own company and the purpose that the company has? And how would you take things like emissions reduction, water, biodiversity, name the thing, and align its importance and which things would be most important to that company? If the company has very little impact on water, maybe water isn't your top priority. And although we want to go out and do a million things, you can't do a million things, right? So I think that business piece is incredibly important. Also, as a leader, I can only do so much. And more importantly, everybody on my team was smarter than me, knew more stuff than me, right? I mean, you've got to have people on your team that really understand their piece part. So a lot of the deep expertise really resided on the team. I mean, I owe all the credit to them. I mean, they really understood the unique aspects of our priorities and how to execute in the right way to ensure that we're protecting the company, but also capitalizing on really interesting opportunities.
Great. Thanks. And it was really interesting there to hear you say that you need to develop a business mindset to actually realize your work. Because I don't think enough people kind of pay attention to the fact that for something to be sustainable, it has to be profitable.
100%, right? I mean, it does not matter if we're saving the earth if there is no more company left to help do that work, right? I mean, it has to be a strong balance of business acceleration and value add to keep the business going and growing. Otherwise, all that work goes nowhere.
People still need to be fed.
Yep.
I really like that approach. So I guess to kind of look into the work you're doing now with us at Responsible Computing, would you mind giving us a little bit of an overview of the work you're doing on mapping our self-assessment to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals?
Absolutely. I was really delighted to be a part of Responsible Computing because it really shows that there's a lot of thought and collaboration going into how do we address compute and technology needs for the future as a collective. And I mentioned earlier, nobody can do this by themselves. We're better together. So having all of these different minds and angles coming together, I think is incredibly exciting. So that's first. But the Sustainable Development Goals, I think, adds a layer of credibility to the work that's happening in your creation of the 6 domains. So, when you think about the ways in which the Responsible Computing Consortium has thought about and divided up the key components of responsible computing, each one of them can stand alone, but they also connect together, right? And the SDGs are very similar. First of all, it is a widely adopted global framework that was, holistically accepted by, United Nations. It is not just used, although it was originally informed by and meant to push nation states, corporations, public entities have adopted them to inform direction and to be able to track progress of their own programs and projects and initiatives. So we're not picking something that isn't widely recognized and is credible. And I think doing that allows us to do a couple of things. One, it allows us to root these concepts in something that others already understand and they're already leveraging. And then the second thing is, although the targets and the language in some of these sustainable development goals aren't specific to data, right? We can extrapolate its meaning to apply to that work, and the detail of how that really how it looks in real time and the practical way to mature it is what the self-assessment tool and the maturity model that's being developed can help bring language to, right? So instead of looking to SDG 16, which is about justice and the rule of law, etc., we don't have to only look at the language there to say, how do we measure that? What does good look like? The self-assessment tool and the maturity model that's being developed can be where we look to say, here's what that means in this context.
Yeah.
So I really love the SDGs for that. I think, you could probably debate if we're getting it all perfectly exactly right. I don't think that matters. I think it's the spirit of the types of SDGs that align, that are both used, as we talked earlier, in the proper planning for good and mature, but also for helping us think through what are good use cases to drive impact, to literally address some of these problems, right? And so I think we can look at it from both angles.
Brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, I think what it will help do as well is it's just taking one particular part of your organization, which is like the computing environment, and then, okay, how can you actually like make a broader impact based on this very high level, global, strategic set of initiatives, and just in a piecemeal way, make this actually realizable through like basically the core of your infrastructure, which for every organization now is their IT environment. So
I also think that a lot of technology and IT practitioners and leaders probably feel very siloed in their organizations. And how does the work we do connect to something bigger? If they could understand crisply and clearly, oh my gosh, it absolutely connects to something bigger. And believe it or not, if you can articulate it for the work you do, and you can raise that up to your leadership, they may not even realize the full connection you have. Think about the amount of acceleration for that work, connecting that to that organization's broader goals and commitments. So I do think that it allows people to go, man, the work that we're doing really does impact bigger global issues, and we have a part in that. I think that inspiration and that piece of purpose really, really at this stage in the game, I think technologists would just love to see that and feel that.
I think it was, it's just reminding me of that light bulb moment you had on a call a while back that we had, where you said like, oh, responsible computing is actually applicable to not just technology vendors, but pretty much every organization.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Automotive manufacturers. I mean, they're basically making computers on wheels now, right? I mean, like we tend to think of IT and technology as tech companies, and that's just not true. I mean, IT is everywhere, right? It's technology and software and, not just the assets, but the full infrastructure and all the work we do. There is nothing we do in this world that isn't driven by technology in some capacity. And even, companies that we don't think of as technology companies literally are becoming technology companies.
Yeah.
And whether you have an in-house IT department or you farm that out, you still need to know that these concepts are being baked in and planned for. First of all, it can also eliminate a lot of waste. And everywhere you can eliminate waste, you probably have other benefits to these SDGs, like reducing emissions, as an example. So I definitely think switching the mindset that this type of work could apply to virtually any organization where technology is somewhere in their sphere, and I can hardly name many where that isn't the case.
Yeah, you're dead right. I mean, one of the big industries actually here, and I never thought I'd be mentioning this on an ESG discussion, but is gambling, right? And all the companies here, where like it makes up such a big bulk of the workforce here in Bulgaria, where I'm based in Sofia, and those are all in reality tech companies. They're not casinos that you actually walk into. It's all online betting or whatever. So that's just one example, but it really has shifted it to where the entirety of your workforce, essentially, well, a large portion of it, is either building IT or they're directly interacting with your IT infrastructure.
That's exactly right. And the more people that understand the connection points to that work and the planning of that work and the output of that work to these bigger issues, I think, boy, first of all, what an opportunity. But second of all, you really have a much larger collective of people that are making decisions that are going to have real impact.
Right. All right. Before we wrap up, I have one last question.
Sure.
If there was a short answer to what you'd like the legacy of your career to be in this field, what would it be?
Oh, you hit me with one that, oh goodness. Legacy of my career. You know, I think for me, I would love someone to be able to say that I lived with purpose. And that I worked with purpose. I've been very lucky that for the past 20 years, that's been the case, that I've worked for organizations that have a purpose. I feel connected to that purpose. I feel like the work I'm doing is driving that purpose forward. And it's more than just selling widgets. It's helping impact the world. So that would probably be the short answer.
I think that's as good an answer as anyone could come up with. And it's certainly, I think, living the dream.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to partner with you, Michael, and the others in Responsible Computing. And thanks for the conversation today.
Absolutely. So where can people find you? On LinkedIn, Page Motes?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, just Page Motes, and very excited to continue this kind of work in the ESG space, regardless of any of the conversations that are happening about, you know, the acronym. The work is still important, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us, Paige. And for everyone out there who would like to participate with what we're doing, it's Responsible Computing is the program that I work with Paige on. And you can find us at responsiblecomputing.net. So thank you very much, Paige. You have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Michael. You too.